It looks like our latest OT appropriately kicked Hella in the pants. She's still playable, but doesn't make a best decks cut this week. Let's go ahead and dive on into what are some of the best performing and most interesting things going on in Marvel Snap right now. Let's kick things off with my favorite thing I've been playing that was buffed in the OTA, Thanos Destroy. I was actually playing this deck list card for card before they buffed Thanos, and I thought it was already good before, and it really appreciates the 2 extra points on the Mad Titan. This deck has a curve that's super low to the ground, meaning you're essentially playing Thanos out in almost every game that you play. Our other cards that cost more than 3 here, Mockingbird and Death, are both cost reduction cards that frequently end up being played for almost or entirely free. This deck list is also pretty budget friendly. I would say past Thanos, the only higher series card that's a must have here is Mockingbird. She's a pretty generally good pickup, gets played in a few different spots. Uncle Ben, as well as Sam Wilson, Captain America, can be exchanged for other things lower on the curve that can enable Mockingbird that you also don't mind blowing up, with Squirrel Girl probably being the best possible thing you could substitute in. Luke Cage is probably the slot I get asked the most questions about whenever I play this deck, and he's just your tech card slot. I think Luke's probably the most generically good tech card in Marvel Snap right now. It outright wins you some matchups like Scream and Ajax, and also provides you with location variance mitigation, letting you auto win things like Negative Zone and Jotunheim a lot of the time. If you want to hedge a different deck with something like Mobius or a tech card like Rogue or even Shang if you're a monster, you could definitely slot that in over Luke. If you're looking to metagame all of the bigger than 12 decks in the format, as well as Loki that increases their deck size when it gets played out, this Ad Hoc variation is my #1 pick for doing that. This is a quintessential 50% deck, meaning there's no matchup in the metagame that you automatically lose at the loading screen because your efficient disruption in Korg, Spider-Ham, and the way you attack their hand with things like Moon Knight and Black Bolt gives you a chance to pick apart absolutely anyone. As far as higher series cards go, the important ones here are the deck's namesake and Darkhawk, as well as Proxima Midnight, who gives you key free points when paired with Moon Knight. Nico Minaru and Fenris Wolf are super replaceable. Just play other 1 energy or 3 energy cards that you can put into their slots, or maybe something cheap like Gorgon that's disruptive. The key thing is you want a minimal number of even cost cards. That way your Moon Knight is going to discard Proxima as consistently as possible. Honestly, there's a chance that with the Hella Noise dying down, that Fenris Wolf, despite having synergy with Moon Knight, might be better used as a different tech card like Mobius or Luke Cage. My next just pick is one I refer to as Little Quinjet. It's one of my favorite types of decks to play in Marvel Snap. The little part is because our curve is incredibly low to the ground, playing a bunch of really cheap cards, but all of our card generators, especially things like Iron Patriot, Valentina, and Agent 13, fill our hand with more expensive things to give us plenty of things to do with our energy in the later game. This deck list also has plenty of slots to play a range of disruptive cards. In this case, I've elected to play Luke Cage, Cosmo, and Mobius since I can play them all out proactively, meaning that you can outpoint people with your Victoria hand Frigga draws, but you can also disrupt people that are looking to go over the top of you, such as Mr. Negative. As far as higher series cards go, I will say that Victoria and Frigga are pretty important for the power level of this deck. They're going to be responsible for adding a lot of stats to your generated cards. After them, I would say Kate Bishop is probably the other really important one, since she gives you 2 generated things for Victoria hand to boost. Iron Patriot and Valentina can be swapped out for other things such as White Queen or Agent Coulson that give you generated cards to spend your energy with in the mid to late game. Our high potential category is decks that have promising stats on untap, but they're in smaller sample sizes. Their stats could level out and put them into mediocrity as more people pick them up, seeing them in videos like this one, but they could also be the next breakout thing if their stats continue to perform like they have so far. We kick off the high potential category with this Hazmat Clog variation featuring Annihilus at the top end of its curve. So the notable interaction here is that Annihilus only moves things over that have negative power, so Hazmat in tandem with both Debris Rocks as well as Mysterio allows you to aggressively clutter up a lot of spots on your opponent's side of the board. Because the deck's creating so many generated cards with everything from the Mysterio and the Debris Rocks to even Hood's Demon and Sentry's Void, we get to leverage Mockingbird as a free bit of stat to the top end of our curve as well. The deck list is also choosing to play Circe as an additional way to gain value out of things like rocks and turn the Void into potentially something useful by upgrading it into a random 5 cost card. As far as higher series cards go, I would say 3 of the 4 it's playing are relatively important. Annihilus is completely non-negotiable. Kate Bishop and Mockingbird are also good power level upgrades. Kate's Acid Arrow provides you with efficient clogging, and Mockingbird is a relatively free pile of stats. Circe is a card you could probably swap out for something else that gives you the ability to clear out things like your Clutter or Sentry's Void for value, with Carnage being one of the most efficient options to do that. The best performing Agamotto deck on Untapped after the OTA is this good card Zabu Mush Amalgamation. One of the upsides to having all of your cards be individually good is that it doesn't matter that Agamotto is making your deck less consistent, because whatever you're drawing is just going to be powerful things that you can slam down, from the 3 best on-curve 2-drops in the game to powerful disruptive elements like Shang-Chi and Enchantress, and even Juggernaut to push your opponent's cards around on the last turn of the game. While the sample deck list obviously has a boatload of higher series cards, one of the upsides to this deck not being remotely synergistic is that I think you can replace any of the individual pieces, or even a few of them, without losing too much of the power level of the deck. The key to looking for replacements that you just kind of keep your curve similar. So for example, if I was going to replace Kate Bishop, Iron Patriot, or Sam Wilson as any of the 2 energy cards that I'm missing, something else like Jeff the Baby Land Shark, or even a Scorpion that plays out for 2 energy, adding points to the board early, is what I would want to change. If you're looking to be the bad man, or perhaps the Sandman in this case in Marvel Snap, this Gorgon, Mobius, Sandman Disruptive trifecta is going to be stellar into lots of different decks that are looking to play created cards and reduce their costs. Things like Erishim and Loki, as well as more fun things like Agamotto and Thanos, are all going to have a really hard time playing multiple cards per turn into this deck's setup. Past these disruptive elements, it's playing just a lot of really efficient ways to put points on the board, with an old favorite being Miss Marvel into Doctor Doom, fanning out 25 points on the last turn of the game across the board, being a combo that we haven't seen be competitive in some time. While the disruptive elements are probably non-negotiable in this deck, I think all the other details can work out depending on what your collection looks like. Again, things like Iron Patriot, Sam Wilson, Rocket and Groot, and even Makari are just cards that are putting efficient points out early. The only thing to keep mind of is that with Miss Marvel, you want to spread your costs out a little bit, so you'll want to make sure you have a similar number of 2 and 3 energy cards in the deck list that you're playing compared to the sample list on your screen now. I think tech cards might be good right now. Muse's local content creator, as he features the 3rd control variation in a row in his weekly deck list roundup. This one's playing the Mad Titan at both the top and bottom end of the curve with the Infinity Stones that he provides. Got a glut of disruptive cards in the middle, and then Alioth and Magneto at the top, as well as a Loki at the bottom. Some thoughts on the bottom and top end in the sample deck list are, I would be curious if Loki's a card you actually want to be playing. Part of the upside of playing Thanos is you have all these stones in your deck, so I would think I would want to be able to play through them more consistently. That being said, Loki, before you play your stones to draw cards, does have some reasonable synergy as well. Magneto at the top end, I think, is a card that might be worthy of considering something else for, now that Thanos has 12 points of power, while Magneto's disruptive ability on 3s and 4s can provide value in some niche situations. The Mad Titan being a better stat stick, I think, might mean Magneto needs to go the way of the dodo. Silver Surfer might honestly hold the title for longest running streak of being a competitive card in Marvel Snap's history. I think since this card dropped in January of 23, it's just been a consistently present force in the metagame in some way, shape, or form. I think this deck list kind of is easy to show why that's the case. There's just so many good, both disruptive 3 energy cards with things like Cassandra Nova and Red Guardian lining up well into various metagame threats, as well as efficient ways to put points on the board, such as Brood and Sebastian Shaw. One consideration in this deck list, if you're missing any of the cards, is simply keep your things costing 3. Stuff like Mobius and Luke Cage are lower series cards that are very potent in any of the slots that you're missing in this deck that are going to auto win you certain matchups on the spot. Our last high potential deck list today is also my personal favorite, this Victoria Renslayer mashup. I'd played a variation of this without the Renslayer package with a lot of success last season, and I think Renslayer is a really ingenious addition to it. Iron Man and Mystique give you an additional way to spread lots of points across the board, and the Mystique part synergizes with Moonstone and Mr. Fantastic to allow you to spread points in a way that's going to be really difficult for your opponent to predict. I think that's one of the key elements of this deck deck has going for it is, even though a lot of your stats are on the board with Victoria and Moonstone, exactly how many points they're going to be putting and where is often a question mark right up until the last moment of the game, making it difficult for your opponent to predict your output range. Unfortunately for you at home, another thing that's difficult about this deck is that a lot of the higher series cards in it are very mechanically unique, meaning they don't really have clean substitutions. I would go so far as to say that Sage is probably the only one that you can cleanly swap out, since Wolfsbane's a pretty reasonable substitution, being a high statted card that gets discounted by Ravonna. As we move along to our top performers, I would just like to point out the difference between these decks and the high potential list we were covering a moment ago. These deck lists are more established archetypes and thus have much higher sample sizes on Untapped, and you can build and play them with confidence that they're going to be good because they're proven over various Marvel Snap metagames. The top performing deck per Untapped metrics right now is this Dakin discard variation, and this doesn't come as remotely a surprise to me. This is easily the most powerful deck I personally have played in Marvel Snap in the last month, with its output numbers being really impressive. You double up Dakin with Frigga, and then you discard multiple shards in a lot of your games, often resulting in 50 plus points of power in 2 locations, letting you keep up with even other powerful linear decks such as Mr. Negative. I also love that this deck list doesn't really get hosed by a single tech card. You have a lot of different threats that scale in a lot of different ways, and even if they disable one of them, you can often cobble together 2 or 3 others to give you plenty of points on the board at the end of the game. Our other top performing archetype on Untapped by the numbers is Spectrum Ongoing Variations. I also love that this deck list has been consistently putting up numbers. I think it's one of the most budget friendly deck lists you can play that's very competitive. I would go so far as to say the only higher series card that's an absolutely must have in this deck list is Ravonna Renslayer, because not only does she have ongoing synergy, but her discount allows you to slam both Iron Man and Mystique on the final turn of the game, often leaving your opponent guessing, are you going to be going big in 2 lanes or using Spectrum to spread out points evenly across the board? If you're missing any other of the cards in the sample deck list, go ahead and swap them out for other ongoing cards that you enjoy playing, ideally keeping the energy cost similar, because it is important that you be playing cards out to the board consistently over the early turn, so Spectrum has lots of points to distribute at the end when she slams down. Finally, before we're done today, you'll note that Starbrand, our latest card release, was not present in any of the data that we covered. While I'm not going to say it's a bad card, it's also not a particularly good one, and it's definitely not very exciting. This deck list was the best Starbrand metrics that we have on Untapped so far. Scar, despite its nerf, is still fine. If you're looking to get your weekend mission done and you have most of the cards in here, this is the shell that I would recommend playing, so you can go ahead and pick up your 300 collector's tokens. That's right, I actually gave 50% more tokens this week, I would assume, because Starbrand is kind of a dud. If you enjoy these weekly decklist roundups being backed, please smash the like button to let the algorithm know that I've returned to making regular Marvel Snap content on this channel, so it can let other folks see it in their feed. If you happen to be new here and the algorithm served this up to you, awesome! Consider subscribing to the channel for weekly decklist roundups here. If you want to see some of these decks in action, be sure to check the link in the video description down below to my secondary channel, where I post a sweet Marvel Snap deck highlight 7 days a week. I'd love to see you back again sometime. I appreciate everybody that made it all the way to the end, and I hope the rest of your snapping this weekend is excellent.